Sure. Well, hello everyone. It is October 6th, 2025. My name is Wes Fryer, and on behalf of the Media Ed Club for the Media Education Lab, I am thrilled to join you to our October meetup, which is titled Vibe Coding with AI. And we are recording this session. However, when we go to breakout rooms, we will turn the recording off. And we want to encourage you to share this far and wide. And we're so excited you're joining us today, whether you're joining us live or you're joining us on the recording. In today's webinar, we're going to encourage you now, if you want to just check in and tell us where you're coming from. If you've got any opinions about vibe coding with AI right now. We'll share a few announcements about some upcoming events with the Media Education Lab, actually more today, as well as more coming this month. And then we will have kind of an overview where I'm going to share some stories and examples of vibe coding. I'm going to share two different ones. Then we're going to go to breakout rooms, as we usually do. And just depending on how many people we have, I will encourage us to try out vibe coding today, playing with media a little bit, playing with AI, and then we'll come back at the end and have a whole group discussion time. So you can access the collaborative notes for this session by going to this shortened link, wfryer.me/media club. And actually, I realized maybe I didn't add that link. So I'm going to copy the link to our slides. I'm going to put this into the chat. So if you want to go to the chat, you can. And then as I am prone to do, I'm going to change this to just for the duration of our meeting today. I'm going to change it so that anyone who wants to can edit the slides, which is, sometimes a little perilous, but we haven't had trouble with that. And so here we are on 6th October 2025, vibe coding with AI. And I will clean this up a little bit later, but here are the slides. And if you want to make that, if you want to go ahead and add to those, feel free to do so. All of our sessions for the Media Education Lab are recorded and shared. You can find us on mediaeducationlab.com, and under the events tab, you'll find the Media Ed Club. I want to encourage everybody today, if you're not already, to connect on Blue Sky. One of the things I'll talk about in one of the vibe coding projects that I really believe is that we need to reclaim social media from the big tech companies and from the algorithms, which are oftentimes opaque as far as how they're trying to, you know, do things to us, whether it's just market, products to us, or, whether it's rage bait and, things that are going to either cause us to be more addicted to our social media feeds, or they're going to, even polarize us and cause us to be upset or angry or whatever. Experience a variety of emotions. So we have some different platforms. I've mentioned these in past episodes. We really just don't have a lot of traction. So what I thought I'd do is just encourage you to connect on Blue Sky specifically. And one of the things that Blue Sky has, and if you're not familiar, Blue Sky was created before the sale of Twitter to Elon and others. It is a social media platform, a microblogging platform like Twitter, very Twitter-like. But it has some big key differences to include not having advertising currently, and then algorithmically, it's very different from Twitter. You can find me at wesfryer.com on Blue Sky, and then I've created a starter pack for media education or media literacy education advocates. And so I'd love to add you to that. So if you want to find me, I will add you to this. And this is part of the way we can connect to find each other on social media. It's great to get together for a webinar to learn, but it's even more powerful for us to connect to each other on an ongoing basis and for us to share ideas. So that's going to be my little plug for this month, to encourage you to do that. I want to share real briefly some beliefs that I have about our present moment that relate to this webinar and being here today. First of all, I believe that building community is essential for our health and wellness. I am a current middle school classroom teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina. I do teach computer programming for our middle schoolers, as well as web design and media literacy. I love to build community, and I think it's important to do both face to face, but also online. And so I'm thankful you're here, and I hope you're going to find, as I have, since I really got involved back in 2019 with the Media Education Lab, that this is a great community, not only of educators, but of other professionals and other citizens interested in media literacy and promoting media literacy. So I also believe that coordinated collective action is essential to affect political and cultural change. And so, around the topic of media literacy, which is so important, we really need to be advocates. And so, by gathering together and organizing and sharing our trusted voices, we can seek to affect change, like to encourage more media literacy education in our classrooms and in our communities. And then the last thing I'll say is that for a long time, I've believed that we need, and I need specifically, to play with media in order to understand it and use it better. And I think this is true of AI as well. The first book I wrote back in 2011 is called Playing with Media, and I probably need to write an updated version of that. But those same key ideas that if we play with it, if we have sort of a lower stakes environment where we can be supported to kind of see how these things work, these tech, in the case of educational technology, now in the case of AI, how can these things work? It can really help us better understand and then better use those tools. I'll also say that I respect that some of my colleagues do not think that the use of any AI tools are ethical. I participated in a conference this summer that really challenged me in my thinking about that. And I do recognize there's a lot of issues with regard to AI and its consumption of energy and water and the ways that it's being utilized and just, so many different things. But I think it's very important for us, this is just personally, to use it. I'm glad you're here, and I want to encourage you to use AI and to share your lessons learned using AI. And so anyway, those are just kind of the pages that I'm on. So a couple announcements before we jump into the content meat of our presentation today about vibe coding. Dan Kretka and Spencer Greenhala have published an article called The Dark Side of Affinity Spaces for Teacher Professional Learning. And later today at 4 p.m. Eastern, so in about 5 hours, they are going to be having a free Zoom webinar talking about that, learning about the characteristics of affinity spaces that might be detrimental to teacher professional learning. In addition, this Friday, and this will be at the same time, which is noon Eastern, join us for Whose Future Is It? AI, Media, and Ethical Imagination. And so this is not a session that requires AI experts or teachers to join. If you're just wondering about the role of media shaping identity, agency, power in our tech-driven world, then this is a session for you. And again, this is a free webinar that'll be at this same time, but on Friday, October 10th. And then finally, a week later, on Friday, October 17th, there'll be a webinar entitled Everyday Manipulation Beyond the Buzzwords. And in terms of just how we can stay grounded, how do we help others stay grounded? We're in a world where, headlines are sometimes written by algorithms, by AI. Misinformation is spreading really quickly. And so I'm looking forward to this session to hopefully get some good tips about some practical ways that I can use AI tools and read the news better. So I apologize for those of you here late joining. I'm doing my best. So it is a little sometimes wild to be on one screen with Zoom. Here's the last announcement. I've talked about this one before. Civics of Technology is an organization started by media literacy educators and other scholars. Dan Kretka is one of the people I know from back in my Oklahoma City days. And every month they have tech talks, and it's just a Zoom chat, not a set agenda, just a chance to dialogue. And I've been able to join a couple of these. It'll be tomorrow, October 7th, because that is the first Tuesday of October, the first Tuesday of the month at 8 p.m. Eastern, whatever that is for your local time. And again, you can go in this case, you can go to their website, which is civicsoftechnology.org, and hit the events link in order to get to those. So let's talk about vibe coding. And if you have, whether you joined us early or late, if you want to go ahead and just put into our chat as kind of a back channel, letting us know where you are geographically in the world, if you're willing to share that, if you want to share anything about your professional role. And if you've got opinions about vibe coding, I just snapped a screenshot of Google News today on October 8th, 2025. And the headline article from Wired is that vibe coding is the new open source in the worst way possible. Then we've got a Business Insider article from Lovable CEO Anton Osika saying vibe code frees the super creative brains at companies to test their ideas. Then we have a Times of India article. What is vibe coding? Here's why Alexander Wang thinks it's a game changer for young programmers. So we've got a wide variety of different articles. Vibe coding is in the news, and it does raise a whole wealth of issues. And I'll go ahead and just highlight the one from this Wired article from today. And I'll also point out, it is possible now as you link to some paywalled articles. Sometimes people who subscribe can share gift links. I know I do that with the New York Times. I also like to use now this archive.ph as a website that allows for the access and sharing of paywall-free versions. And so in this article by Lily Hay Newman, subtitled as Developers increasingly lean on AI-generated code to build out their software. As they have with open source in the past, they risk introducing critical security failures along the way. And so I, again, have colleagues who are very negative and opposed to the use of open source, in part because of a concern for security. One of the things I'll say about open source and open projects is that I have found, and this is why I think WordPress is still being used as an open source content management system on over half the websites in the world. I don't know what the current statistic of that is. Certainly, Apache built in Linux has been for a long time, I think, the most commonly used platform for web servers. When you have a lot of eyes on projects, you can get a lot of feedback and you can identify bugs. And so certainly with any kind of coding project, it's essential to pay attention to the security vulnerabilities and the security issues. And, if someone is going to put out code that hasn't been analyzed for security vulnerabilities, and especially if something that is not just an experiment, not something just that we're playing with, which is kind of some of the examples I'll share today, it's possible for some bad stuff to happen, for people to be able to, compromise systems and install viruses and other kinds of malware and things like that. So again, as I did and want to with AI overall, I want to recognize there are a lot of different opinions that people have about these tools, and there are real risks and real concerns. So I'm not wanting to present this in a Pollyanna-ish, Nirvana, ooh, isn't this great? It's just the greatest thing ever. There are no problems. There are problems. There are challenges, but I think, well, my position is that it really opens up, vibe coding really opens up some amazing transformative doors. And I have personally created, as a middle school classroom computer science teacher, I've created some code that I'm going to share with you today that there is absolutely no way I would have created it without the help of AI. So today for our session, we have a number of articles that we recommended to you. As usual, we have one or two, in this case, just one article that was sort of the focus article. And this was a New York Times article that Kevin Roose wrote back in February, using that phrase, vibe coding. Then there's also a series of articles and podcasts and even a journal article that we also would refer to you to. So again, you can get to all of this on the Media Education Lab's website. If you go home, underneath programs, that's where you'll find our Media Ed Club. And then we archive our sessions. Today's session is our upcoming session. And so when you click on that, we have the description. If it's upcoming, you can register. And then here's where you can get these links to the required media and the optional media. So for those of you that might be wanting to share this with others and students, I definitely think these articles can give some great background in being able to get more of an in-depth deep dive into vibe coding and what others are saying about vibe coding. So here is what I would like to do with today's breakout session. And I'm going to talk here, I think, for maybe around 10 minutes or so, telling you some stories about vibe coding and some examples. But then we're going to go to breakout rooms, and I'm just going to put this out there, and I really encourage you to stay. Sometimes people will drop off when the interactive part starts, and we do have a pretty small group, so maybe today we'll just break out into two groups. I don't know. We'll see. We have some chat bots in the group too, so we don't truly have 16 folks in the room. We've got some AI bots as well. But the point is, there's different platforms to use. You may be most familiar with only one of these. I personally have started to use Google Gemini more. I pay with our family to have this Google One account that gives us more shared storage in Google Drive, etc. But that also gives us access to Gemini Pro. I do pay for the Pro version of ChatGPT, and it is the one that I have used the most for vibe coding. And the examples that I'll share with you today are ChatGPT examples. But Claude, which is Anthropic's AI, is certainly also a very powerful and capable AI for doing all kinds of things. These are general models, and they, have you get different results when you try them. So my encouragement today in our breakout rooms, which we'll go to here in about 10 or so minutes, is going to be to play and to use some of these tools. So let me tell you some stories. So as I mentioned, I am a current middle school um, classroom teacher in North Carolina, and I have been dabbling with programming and coding kind of my whole life. I'll just date myself. I graduated high school back in 1988. And in 1986, 87, I was actually doing my Eagle Scout project. And what I did was I actually wrote a program in a software solution called DBase 3 Plus, and it was a database interface for the time and talent survey at the church that sponsored our scout troop, so that instead of just using paper, the staff of the church could input the data from these surveys and find out who wanted to, volunteer to, rake leaves or, serve food for the homeless or usher or whatever. And so you might think that put me on a course to be a computer programmer for life, but it didn't. At the Air Force Academy where I went to college, we all had to take Turbo Pascal, and I took that class, but computer programming wasn't my thing. I was into international relations and political science and geography and those kinds of things. But when I went into higher education as an administrator in the early 2000s, in 2001, I was the director of distance learning at Texas Tech University for 5 years. And I used a program then called FileMaker Pro. And there were some other tools that we used that enabled me to create web-enabled databases that let us interact with data. For instance, we have folks and had, every college of education does have student teachers. And so each year student teachers would apply, for student teaching, and they'd be placed and matched in a classroom with a teacher. And so, for instance, I, helped our coordinator of student teaching and field experience do all of that digitally online so that students could put that in, and she had a database to work. It was very powerful. We had, at that time, this was before Zoom, we video conferenced from Lubbock, Texas, from Texas Tech, out to the 50 or 60 surrounding school districts all over West Texas. And we were using video conferencing units from like VTEL and what else? We have Polycom and other companies. Basically, these were room-based systems that cost like $50,000 or $80,000. They were expensive. But anyway, the coordination of all this, because we had students that wanted to take classes and teachers that offered. So what I'm trying to say is I have experimented with algorithms and with some with coding, but I have done that a lot more with sort of what you see is what you get tools. I wouldn't consider myself to be a real wizard of scripting. And so when I learned about vibe coding, I immediately became excited because there are a number of things that I would like to create, but I do not have the coding chops or the coding expertise or the money to, pay a coder or hire a team to code these things. And so what you're seeing a screenshot of here is my GitHub account, which my username there is wfryer. And GitHub is a free platform for sharing code, but also iteratively building code together with others. And up to this point, I've basically just been sharing my own coding projects. I really haven't collaborated, and it's called forking other people's projects when you want to sort of make your own version. But GitHub is a really important thing to introduce students to. A friend of mine, when I was in Oklahoma City as the technology director of our school, used GitHub Classroom for his high school students. Last semester, I actually taught 2 sections of AP Computer Science for our high school, and I learned quite a bit about what we're teaching in AP Computer Science principles. But anyway, I would just say if you're not familiar with GitHub and you haven't created an account there and you're interested in vibe coding, it's a great place to create an account to see code that others have created, but then also have a place to share your code. And just like I'm doing today, then be able to share stories with others, and then people can actually see your code and access it, and potentially they could build on your code as well. So these are the 6 different projects that I've been working on, and I think the first one that I did might have been this Packet Defender project. I have created mainly HTML and JavaScript programs, but I did create a Python script. And again, you don't have to have all the coding expertise. The more that you know about coding and algorithms and coding prompting, because prompting is very, very important for the use of AI tools, probably the better results you're going to get. But I'm going to tell you stories about 2 of these today. So first one I'm going to tell you about, I just updated, I think last week or the week before. And this is a little program that I call Packet Defender. So I teach a web design class for middle school, love teaching web design. And one of the things that I try to help my students understand is how the internet works. And they have some knowledge about this, but what are packets and what are routers and what is TCP/IP and how does all this work? And what cyber attacks? What is a denial of service attack? And all of these different things. Gamification. I know Randall is in the room, and he is a real guru of game-based learning and education. So I'm a bit nervous to share this because this is a very modest game. But what I'm going to do is show you that I have a blog post about this. Well, let's just play it. Let's just play it, and then I'll give you a little background. So in addition to sharing code on GitHub, you can also share executable code. In this case, this is HTML and JavaScript on GitHub pages. And so I'm going to go ahead and link to this, and I'll go ahead and put in my name. And you can choose the easy, intermediate, or hard version. I'm going to just choose to play easy. And so the description is this is going to refresh every 60 seconds. And so in order to get some points, I have to put in the origin IP address. I have to look and see where this is going. So this is going to securebank.com, and it's using a local IP address. I don't have these corrected for local IP addresses. Wait a second. That was looking for the name, the packet name. The packet name's in bold. Okay, and then I can transmit the packet, and oh, look at that. I just got some points. I think my points, my points are actually off here, and I need to go in and adapt my code. But anyway, it's copying IP addresses. It's looking over here at the at a translation table. So it's trying to go to firewall.main. So that's one of the things that I want my students to learn. I'm going to defend the server. All right, I got some points, and I could keep going. And this is going to refresh depending on whether I choose small or depending on whether I chose easy, hard, or intermediate. And there I just put that link in Packet Defender. So if you want to play this game, you can. Now, I am not going to try and claim this is the most amazing game ever. In fact, it's in the 1.0 version, which I made back in January. It was a lot worse. I spent a few hours last week or the weekend before last, something like that, working on this. But it has given me an opportunity in a gamified environment to talk to students about, for instance, DNS. What is the domain name service? Well, it's the service that translates, a website like Media Education Lab or mediaeducationlab.com or my blog speedofcreativity.org. It translates that into an IP address so that as packets are created and they're sent over the internet, they get to the right place and they get put in the right order, and we're able to see web pages and web content. So it's a kind of a basics of the internet. So let me show you this code, and then I'll show you. I wrote a blog post about this, kind of telling the story. So this is my Packet Defender project for on GitHub, and I did have AI help me out with a little bit of this, explaining my goals. I want students to understand IP addressing and DNS resolution and packet transmission, and maybe a little about cybersecurity. So we have, they have to decide, is this packet under attack? Is this server under attack, or is it just a regularly transmitted packet? And I wanted this to be a single HTML file, very basic. I didn't want to have to, compile Python or have students use special software, just from a simple web page. And then some of the things I added in this 2.0 version was some different difficulty modes, because depending when kids are starting, like originally it was refreshing every 30 seconds, and there was a lot kind of going on to figure out. So I wanted to give students more time. It's interesting because if they choose the hard level, it does refresh faster, but they can get more points because they have more packets that they can transmit. I put a 5-minute timer on here to try to kind of encourage some creativity, and it doesn't keep high scores, but I've got my students taking some screenshots and putting those into a discussion group on Canvas, so we're kind of seeing how we're doing. And then I wanted a little more visual feedback. So here's the code. I'm going to click this HTML. And so this is an HTML file, and it is 579 lines of code. And I started off actually, okay, I forgot this. I started off coding this in ChatGPT. That's how I did the 1.0 version. But like I said, I pay for a Google One account. And so I have Gemini Pro. And so I switched over to Gemini, and I said, okay, I wonder how Gemini will do with this. I've also written a blog post, and I have this linked at the bottom of this slide. And so I've got some screenshots. Here's a wonderful code.org, video with Vint Cerf explaining IP addresses and DNS. And so I kind of told the story of what I did, and encourage people to check that out. Not, again, a super impressive game, but folks, I am telling you, there is no way I would have created this in just a few, hours of time on the weekend without AI. Yes, I've been using HTML and making web pages probably since 1995 or 93. Actually, I set up my blog in 93. And so like we're talking early days of the internet, but I am not a code guru. There is no way I'm going to be able to do this, and I'm certainly not going to be able to do it so quickly. So that is my first story and example. I'm going to do one more. But when we go into breakout rooms and we start to play, one of the suggested prompts is you can tell the AI to make a simple game or an interactive animation. And you could tell it, this is the thing, right? It's a little hard to think, whoa, how can I make an engaging game right now when I haven't, even thought of it? Think about something that you might be either teaching somebody or wanting somebody else to understand a concept. And you can actually ask, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever to give you ideas. Say, I'm trying to think of a way I could visualize or create an interactive game to help other people or to help my students understand this. Can you give me some ideas? And then you can ask it to go ahead and code it for you, and then you can see how it works. All right, so that's example number one. Example number two, and how am I doing on time? I'm probably talking too much. Okay. This one I am so excited about, and this is my most extensive project I've done so far, and I call it the DIY Federated Reader. And so again, I wrote a blog post about this that you can check out, and maybe the best way to, well, I think that we need to reclaim our media feeds One of the things that I, notice and experience, and you may as well, is that there's all kinds of newsletters today that people write, but they're not all in the same place. I am using Substack a lot on my phone and iPad and computer. I have several newsletters on Substack. I read a lot, but all these come into my email, and I don't like to read newsletters. In fact, I don't. Here's a little confession. I don't really like email a lot. I mean, I do. I'm glad for it. But, there's so much spam. It can be very overwhelming. And when I read my news, I really don't want to just do that inside email. So, what I coded again within the space of a few hours using initially ChatGPT, and then I also switched over to Gemini for this, is a script that goes into my email and it extracts all of the newsletters that have been sent, not only with Substack, but also with Ghost or with MailChimp. And then it formats those in a way that others can see, and it actually posts it on a Mastodon social media account that I had, and then allows me to read it inside Flipboard. So that's a lot of words. Let me show you what this looks like. So here is the actual federated reader account. So if you're not familiar with Mastodon, Mastodon is an open source, it's like an open source Twitter. And so I just created a separate account on a separate server. One of the things that's more complicated about Mastodon is you have to decide what server to join to create your account. And so I created this on the mastodon.social account. But this refreshes every hour. So here is the post for when I originally made this on September 29th, which I called Reclaiming Our News Feeds. And then here are posts that this was, 27 minutes ago. These are newsletters. Many of these are coming from Substack, but they're coming from other places. These are links to newsletters, but they have the title of the newsletter, the date of the newsletter, and the link to it. And the way that some social media platforms will now work is they'll immediately grab a picture and they'll put that right into the image. And so this is running actually as a Google script, and it's just continually updating. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share my phone, and I'm going to go to a website called Flipboard. And I would be curious, do any of you use Flipboard? This is an absolute, like, not sponsored endorsement. I have been using Flipboard on my iPad and on my phone for a long time. Here's an incognito window showing a whole lot of news articles. And by the way, boy, it is so tough, isn't it, to open up a news feed today because of everything that's going on. So I don't tend to do that with my middle school students. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my iPhone screen with you, and I'm going to open up Flipboard here. So here is my iPhone. I have a little folder I call Learn, and you can see I've got my Google News and my Substack and my, AP News and local news and things. But I'm going to open up Flipboard. And so Flipboard has a feed that's curated for me. They have their own algorithms. But then when I tap this little, quad of four squares, these are things that I have subscribed to myself. And one of the things you can subscribe to are Mastodon accounts. You can also have lists within Mastodon. So when I tap my federated feeds, I can see these articles. And of course, many of these are political and about the shutdown and other kinds of things. But I'm able to view all these, and I can go to them here inside um, uh, Flipboard. I can choose to open this up in Safari, but it'll actually just pop me right out into Substack. And so then I can read these articles. If I like it, I can heart it, I can restack it, I can do all kinds of things. So the point is, I have created for myself with vibe coding a tool that suddenly takes all of my newsletters and it allows me to read them inside Flipboard, which has been my absolute favorite way of reading the news for so long. So again, let's take a look at the code really quick. I'll show you that blog post, and then we're going to go to breakout rooms. Actually, we may have, if anybody wants to ask some questions About this, we can do that. So here's an introduction. This is the README file that explains how to turn your Gmail newsletters into a personal Mastodon feed. And so I give some background about what this does and how to set it up. This is a Google script. So this is JavaScript. Again, this was vibe coded initially with ChatGPT, then with Gemini. So you can see at the top under the comments, it's identifying this is the 1.4 version of Federated Reader Bot. I'm the author, licensed under an MIT open license, and the collaborator was Gemini. And there's other comments that you're going to see in here. And in order to get this to work, you have to get an API key. No, I don't know. It's been a minute since you have to do this inside your Google account. You have to authorize this, and you have to put this script. I originally did that trying to say, oh, could I use ChatGPT and use an API key? I haven't done vibe coding with that yet, but this works as a Google script. Again, folks, I'm telling you, 382 lines of code. There is no way at all that Wes Fryer is going to code this without the help of AI. I'm just not. So this is the link to the blog post that kind of gives you the story and the background of how this works. But I'm real excited about both of these projects. And I have talked for too long. I'm going to stop my screen share. And I need to stop pinning myself here. Would anybody like to ask any questions about, if I can stop pinning myself. Would anybody like to ask any questions about those vibe coding projects before I go ahead and open up the breakout rooms? We'll have about 15 minutes in breakout rooms, and I'll share with you, but does anybody want to respond to that? That's a lot. As often happens, sometimes it is easier to share this in a breakout room with other people than to share it live with everybody. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do that. Here's what I recommend you do. I'm going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes. I would recommend that you select a screen sharer. So select somebody who can share the screen, just because that's kind of interesting to see what other people are doing. And then I think I'm just going to create 2 breakout rooms, and you can join the one that you would like. And just use the tool that you want. We won't say, oh, this is the Chat GPT room. Use the tool that you want, but ask the AI to create a simple game with HTML that does blank, or it makes an interactive animation. Help student learn the concept of that. So this is an opportunity to play. This is a chance to reflect a little bit and share, but also play with these tools. Use this as an example to go ahead and set these up. All right, so I am creating 2 breakout rooms. I am creating them. I have opened up the rooms, so you can go ahead and just join room 1 or room 2. There is no assignment one way or the other as far as what tool to use. We just want to kind of get people in smaller rooms. So please join one of the rooms. I will join one of them as well. And then here in about 10 or 15 minutes, I will bring us back and we'll do a little bit of a debrief with everybody back here. I'm going to pause the recording. I was muted. Welcome back, everyone. I've renewed our recording, and we've got about 10 minutes left, and I just want to open it up for anybody to share anything you talked about. In room 1, I didn't do any vibe coding. We just were talking, and maybe that's what was happening in the other room as well. But would anybody be willing to share something that you all either talked about in your room or respond? And if you're willing to share sort of your context as far as kind of how you come to this topic, that would be awesome too. So you can raise your hand within the Zoom, or if you just want to grab the mic, please share and tell us a little bit about what you heard, or respond to stuff that we talked about. Be brave.
Wes, I'll jump in, but very, very briefly because I want to make sure other folks can have time to share. We ended our chat. My main name is Dawn Berkeley, and I work as director of ed tech at the school I work with. And part of my role is to work with faculty and their students on integration of tech. So Barbara and Redfold and I, we were talking a little bit about how Gemini actually quote unquote works. I think we keep hearing about it, or schools and teachers hear about it, but like the idea that Gemini can essentially, in effect, scour your existing documents, resources in your school and organizational workspace and use it and leverage it to produce the things that you're looking for. We just kind of started there. The
Hmm.
advantage of using Gemini is that if I'm a teacher, I teach ethics. And if I want to look at my entire ethics course and forget, or maybe have forgotten about things I taught, say 3 or 4 years ago, I can get it to develop a mind map, a holistic visual for me about, oh, here's where you taught this, and try to vertically align. Oh, remember you talked about media ethics in this spot here. Maybe you want to reference it here. And the fact that it can go into my existing documents and essentially create a story almost for me based on what I've already done. There's no need to
Yes.
reinvent the wheel effect. So I think that was kind of where we ended, that you can bring
That's
in your sheets, your docs, anything you
yes.
work in.
Yes. That is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. One of the early, I think it was back in October of last year, webinars we did was about Notebook LM, which is a Google product where you basically make your own library of materials and then it will use those materials. The same thing, like it's what's interesting about these different, School AI or Flint or these other products, they're being built on top of these general models, but you can really do any of this with a general model based on the prompt. And so your idea is fantastic. Like, here's my resources. In fact, I've been doing this for our student conferences. We have student-led conferences for middle school. And so I will download my entire Canvas course. I said, give me the list of skills that students are having. And I end up giving a form to students to say, identify the top, the two favorite things that you've done, skills, what have you struggled with, but like getting it to analyze my stuff. So not just going out in the world, but yeah, doing that. And this vibe coding, like what I was talking about with this little simple packet defender, thinking about a simulation or a game. Randall and I were talking about how, can we have students do this? I haven't gotten to that yet. I had some of my high school AP computer science students last semester ask me about a vibe coding class. Can we take a class with this? But I think that it's the possibilities here, especially for using, our own materials, but then, sort of pointing the AI to them and then saying, hey, how can I visualize this better? How can we have an interactive game that helps highlight, this ethical dilemma or this concept? Who else would like to share?
Wes, while we have you there, would you talk to us a little bit? I think this question kind of ties into something Barbara brought up about our own materials versus others. For example, if I'm teaching a course in Canva and I'm using the textbook, right? The textbook from some author.
Yes,
What are the limitations? Like we got into a discussion about fair use. Like what are the parameters around copyright, usage of, can you talk a little bit about that?
I will try. So, the clearest way to do this is to use materials that are like open textbooks and materials that don't have copyright, but a lot of us can't do that. Um, so, there may be outright prohibitions that your school and organization may have about putting what material is put into an AI. For instance, student data, being careful about that, using a platform that's going to make sure that that student data doesn't become training data and then part of a larger database. Um, so I think it is important to be cautious. Um, because if you're not using material that is explicitly you know, open texts, then there could potentially be some issues. One of the things that's interesting, that OpenAI is being sued by the New York Times right now over this very issue because people without subscribing to the Times and without paying have been able to get verbatim transcripts of articles and things like that. And so now ChatGPT by OpenAI is more limited in the kinds of things that it will produce, but it has ingested or taken in a lot of content, including full text books and all of this. So I would say that it is a slippery and undefined. By the way, I'm not a lawyer, so I need to say that at the beginning. It's a challenging environment. Um, but so be careful, especially with the use of copyrighted materials, and taking note of what tool you're using and what your organization may not have those guidelines yet. That's a great question. We probably could do a whole session about that. Who else would like to ask a question or share a thought? We've got 3 or so more minutes. Be brave. There's not a silly question in here, folks. Just ask away. One question that we had earlier, and when we went to breakout rooms, was how can we use materials from GitHub? And if you've got another question, go ahead and put it in. I'll show this really quick because this was a question from earlier. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll go back to our slides. So here, for instance, let's go back to the game. Here's Packet Defender, and here is the, trying to get myself small. All right, here's the code for Packet Defender. This is one of the reasons I made this simple was so that it was simple. It was just less complicated, and so you could just straight up copy this text code. So you could highlight this code. You can also, I think, in GitHub, go up and choose to download it. So I can just download this raw file. So this index file is now on my computer. And now when I double click this .html file, it actually opens here inside my web browser, my Chrome browser, and then I can just play it. So with GitHub, you can go to a project and you can download that code and you can run it. If it is a program that's running in Python, you'll have to have Python on your machine and you'd have to compile things and it would be more complicated. The things that I've done so far have been a little simpler. They're HTML and JavaScript based. Any other questions anybody wants to ask? I think I'm going to need to wrap us up. Well, this to me, AI, there's a lot of controversy and there's a lot of things we need to be discussing as a society. And, I'm concerned about an AI bubble. I'm concerned about all this investment, this energy use. There's a whole lot of things to be concerned about. But I really do believe that these tools give us unprecedented power. I have never used a tool as powerful, and I say that tool just generically, like anything created by human beings to make some process or work simpler. I've never used anything as powerful as these AI tools, and they just keep getting better and better. Coding is a very, in my opinion, good use for AI. It's different than writing a creative, like writing a haiku or writing poetry or writing an essay, because there's some different elements in there of just sort of creativity and art. There's a function here. Randall was talking with me about ethics. We got to talk to our kids about ethics and what they create, but does it work? Does it create what you want? So I will also point you to a little website I set up a year or so ago, ai.westfire.com, and that's just a place for sharing some of my learning, some presentations that I've done, and some other thinking about AI. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our session on vibe coding with AI. I want to remind you that this session, not the breakouts, but the other portions are being recorded, and so those will be shared. And so here on our Media Ed Club website, when you go to past meetings, we will have our session here, just like last month's favorite podcast share out. When you click on that, you've got the video right there, and we've got all of those in a playlist. But perhaps even more importantly, please visit the Media Education Lab's main website, sign up for the newsletter so that you can be updated about events that are coming, get in on these free webinars, and I'd love to hear from you. So if you are playing with vibe coding, I guess I'll do this last slide, reach out. I'm on a variety of social media platforms to include Blue Sky. Would love to add your Blue Sky to this starter pack for us to connect beyond our session that we're doing here. So hope you have a wonderful month and hope to see you in a future webinar coming soon for the Media Education Lab and the Media Ed Club. Thanks for tuning in today.